My topic is the Pope and the protection of minors and the vulnerable. This title was given to me um, by the chair of the Academy for Global Church Leadership. So I have focused my presentation on the three recent popes before Leo the 14th, of course, and I will go through especially the canonical measures that have come about over the last 23 years. So, when it comes to child sexual abuse and abuse in general, the global awareness about this has come about, especially in the year 2002 with the publications of the allegations against priests in the Archdiocese of Boston in the United States in early 2002. That set off, at least in my perception, the very first global wave of attention given to this topic. Of course, from the 80s, 1980s, 1990s, there had been allegations publicly made in Canada, in the US, in Australia, later in Ireland and UK, but a global awareness had not come about. So that was truly happening in 2002 with the Boston Globe Spotlight revelations, which, as many of you know, led also to create a film on this that won the Academy Award, the Oscar. Within the Catholic Church, until 2001, 2002, there was no clear global policy on this. And in the Holy See, there were different dicasteries that were dealing with allegations. So when under the pontificate of St. John Paul II, Cardinal Ratzinger, at that time the prefect of the Congregation for Doctrine, brought this to to Pope John Paul II's attention. John Paul II called a meeting of cardinals and spoke in very strong terms about the need to change, to converge. And these are his words. This time of trial will bring purification of the entire Catholic community, a purification that is urgently needed. Now, 23 years on, we could still repeat the same words because the time of trial is still on, and it is still on in those countries that have had to deal with this issue for the last 40 years, which is mainly the Anglo-Saxon world, but it is also true for example, the Central European world that really took on the issue only from 2010 onwards. This is not to say that there hadn't been allegations before that, also in Central Europe, but the second wave of international news broke only in early 2010 from Germany through other countries, and reaching now over the last, let me say, 8 to 10 years, also areas where until very recently there hadn't been any news about. So St. John Paul II spoke in these strong terms about the need of purification. And I would say for the Catholic Church, this is an ongoing need. And for people who think that this topic will be over in a few years' time or is already over because we have talked so much about it, I only can say that this is an illusion because I am convinced and I see from my experience with the students here at the Institute of Anthropology at the Pontifical Gregorian University and at the Gregorian as such, as well as in my many travels to all continents, and many countries with this topic, that in most parts of the world, this is only evolving. This is just starting. This is not ending any time from now. And this is also true because we have many survivors and victims among us, those who are known and those who have not disclosed and will not disclose the abuse they have suffered. So the response and the conversion and the purification that needs to take place, according to St. John Paul II and to Pope Benedict and to Pope Francis, as I will show, uh, it means especially also taking responsibility for the crimes and the sins that have happened in the past. And when you listen to victims and survivors, you realize, sorry, you realize that this is something that sticks with them and that needs attention, and not only in a one-off meeting, in some type of limited approach, in some type of financial compensation or whatever you call it, but in really taking to heart what they have to say. And I just want to quote a few of the voices that I have heard repeatedly over the last decades within the church. I talk only about church victims because here we talk about the Pope and or the popes and their policies and their attitudes. Of course, it could be said in an analogous way also about other sectors of society and organizations and institutions, but we focus here on the Catholic Church. So I have heard over and over again from victims within the church that nobody has ever listened to me, to my story, to my hurt. I'm livid that they push away the responsibility. I don't know to whom I can turn for support. If only I had not been so powerless. I had blind trust in Father X. I couldn't imagine that he could do anything evil. I've started long enough, I give up. I feel so dirty and guilty. I, the victim. If only they had the courage to confess their crimes and do justice to us. I honestly believe that uh, Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was prefect of the Congregation for Doctrine, as it was called then, learned about the cases of abuse, and he learned about it over the many years he was prefect of the congregation, and realized that the harm and the damage that was done to the little ones, especially children and youth in the care of the church, in schools, in parishes, in boarding houses, in foster homes, in kindergartens, and so forth. He realized that this is at stake when we talk about safeguarding and about prevention of abuse. This is at stake. The 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 damage that is done to the little ones, that those who, as Jesus says in the gospel on several occasions, are the privileged ones, are those who should be safe in their being brought to Jesus himself. And one of the most important things I believe Cardinal Ratzinger realized was that apart from all the sexual misbehavior and all the abuse of power that is behind such type of abuse, I believe that Cardinal Ratzinger had a very keen sense of the spiritual damage that is done to those who entrust their lives to the Catholic Church, are strong believers, and then that trust is broken terribly. Because, as we say, in recent times, the epistemic trust that was given to the Catholic Church that had been built up over 2000 years was broken and has been broken for many, many victims in many, many other faithful and in society at large. At least there's a huge disappointment and shattering of that type of trust. I wanted to mention this because this is, I believe, for at least for Cardinal Ratzinger and then Pope Benedict, for Pope Francis, and I do hope also for Pope Leo, are ingredients and very important elements of the engagement of the popes in their dealings with perpetrators, victims, secondary victims, which means parishes, families, schools where abuse has happened and traumatization has taken place, as well as the church as a whole. So Pope Benedict in 2010, on 19th of March, sent a letter to the Catholics of Ireland in which he, in response to the victims' voices, wrote, "I wish to exhort all of you as God's people to reflect on the wounds inflicted on Christ's body, the sometimes painful remedies needed to bind and heal them, and the need for unity, charity, and mutual support in the long-term process of restoration and ecclesial renewal." So I find it very interesting that Pope Benedict wrote that letter in 2010, which, as some of you may remember, was supposed to be and was celebrated as the year of the priest. And we have had um, in that year, the publication of news is starting from Germany, then, of course, Central Europe, and we have had a wave of news that then went over into the whole international arena. And a few weeks later, Pope Benedict wrote that letter to the Catholics of Ireland, a society, as I've read yesterday again in the statistics published yesterday, that a society that used to be probably the most Catholic country in Europe, at least among the most Catholic ones, sent thousands and thousands of missionaries across the globe, and in which now one third of the population has some trust in the Catholic Church, one third, while one third is completely mistrusting the Church, and one third stands in the middle. And this mainly, or let me say at least as perception tells, heavily linked to the news about abuse and the cover-up of abuse by church leaders. So when Pope Benedict wrote that letter and expressed his wish, exhorting all of us as God's people, and refers to the wounds inflicted on Christ's body, he refers in his theological language to the wounds of the victims of abuse. He doesn't do anything else than Jesus himself in Matthew 25, when Christ himself identifies himself with those who have been broken, have been harmed, have been wounded so grievously. Benedict does the same as we read in Matthew 25. He identifies the victims of abuse with Christ's body and their wounds as the wounds inflicted on Christ's body, which is also the church, as we know. So he says we need to engage in the sometimes painful remedies to bind and heal, and the need for unity, charity, and mutual support. I also find the concluding words of that phrase very telling. He speaks about a long-term process of restoration and ecclesial renewal. St. John Paul II spoke about the time of trial and the need for purification. Benedict speaks about the process of restoration and ecclesial renewal. So, in different terms, the same message. Don't think that this is going to finish soon. Engage seriously in an effort of purification, restoration, and renewal. And this is not done by simple measures of changing some law and changing the language. This is a serious engagement. And if you don't commit to that, we fall short of what the first two popes to whom I'm referring here have asked us to do. So, what happened at the Holy See? The Holy See, in its attitudes towards policy and norms, first, we need to realize that the Holy See was one of the first signatories of the Convention on Child Rights in 1989-1990. The Holy See committed to the Convention of Rights of Children. In 2001, under the guidance of Cardinal Ratzinger, of course with the approval of John Paul II, within the Church we have a binding law which is called Sacramentorum Sanctitatis Tutela, in which Article 6 speaks about child sexual abuse. That motu proprio was revised in 2010 when Ratzinger had become Pope Benedict. And in 2011, in preparation of the first big conference on child protection, which I will mention in a minute, the then Congregation for Doctrine of Faith, CDF, in May 2011, issued a letter to all heads of bishops' conferences, of the 112 bishops' conferences that we have in the world. So, in that letter, the CDF, with the signature of Cardinal Leveda, who was the prefect at that time, asks all bishops' conferences worldwide to come up with guidelines and to address 5 areas. First, assisting victims of abuse. This is number 1. So the guidelines urge the bishops' conferences, to assist victims of abuse and to address that in their guidelines. Second, cooperating with civil authorities. So if there had been a doubt how the Church in the different dioceses, in the different bishops' conferences, in the different institutions, in the different religious congregations and orders, have to accept and follow state legislation, CDF in 2011 made it crystal clear that there is no other way than to comply with state legislation, period. There is no doubt about that. If the country in which you live and operate publishes, promulgates, implements law, civil law, penal law, you as church institution, whatever that is, have to comply with that, period. So if there are reporting laws, you have to comply with them. If there are measures like sex offender registers, like in the US and in a few other countries you have to comply with that. So the problem, of course, for the Catholic Church is that there is no one state and no one country that has the very same laws. So, but what the letter urges is, under the guidance of CDF and with the approval of Pope Benedict, to cooperate with civil authorities to the full. 3, support for all priests and for those accused. So we have seen in number 1, assisting victims. We see number 3, support for priests and those accused. As I repeatedly say, the Church fails so often the victims of abuse. But the Church fails also those who have been accused. And this is not to say that there should be any undue mercifulness or leniency, but even accused and even the worst perpetrators are human beings, and they have a human right of being listened to and of receiving the support they need, also in spiritual, in psychological, in technical, in an administrative sense. Otherwise, we do not really live up to our responsibility. And let me add, we do not do the necessary so that these people who have perhaps probably abused other people do not recommit the same crime. 4. The formation for future priests and religious, which means how do you address in the seminary formation or in religious formation issues of human affectivity, relationships, psychosexual affectivity, and so forth. 5, educating community on safeguarding of minors. Educating community. This is not a thing, according to those guidelines, it shouldn't be a thing only of church leadership. It should be an educational effort for the community, which means every parish, every school, every charitable work, every retreat house, every formation house needs to be educated on safeguarding of minors. If you don't realize that, and if you just shuffle away our responsibility as I'm only a single, simple, faithful in the pews, I'm only a little professor, I'm only a little bishop, I'm only a little priest, I'm only, and so forth. If you don't realize that this is an effort of all, and only as such can be effective, we miss out on the most important mission that the church has given us in this respect. So these were the areas of concern that the guidelines of every single bishops' conference should take care of. It won't come as a surprise to many of you that until the year 2020, so 9 years after the CDF had issued the letter and has asked all bishops' conferences to produce guidelines by June 2012, so after 1 year, that in 2020 still there were about 20 bishops' conferences that had either not published any guidelines or had guidelines that did not really integrate all what was needed according to the letter by the CDF. However, in 2013, the Vatican City-State law included the guidelines and the obligations that the CDF had set out for the whole church and applied it also to the Vatican City-State itself. So, if you wish, the Holy See applied it also to the Vatican City-State. So they did what they needed to do with some delay, but at least they did it. In between, so from May 2011 to June 2012, when the guidelines were due to be reported to the CDF again, we here at the Pontifical Gregorian University established the Center for Child Protection, and the commencement of that Center for Child Protection was celebrated by with a symposium towards healing and renewal, to which we had invited representatives from all bishops' conferences, a representation of the male and female superior generals of the religious orders and congregations, representation from the Oriental churches in the Catholic Church, and prefects and secretaries of the dicasteries of the Holy See. Now, I would call it the first truly Catholic, so means worldwide, leadership meeting within the Catholic Church on the issue. And as I said, it was a combination of a conference that was not only scientific, it was also meant to help the bishops' conferences to write their guidelines and to come up with the sharing of best practices, how to implement the guidelines. But it was also the establishment of the Center for Child Protection, which later then became the Institute of Anthropology. I just mentioned this because the Archdiocese of Munich and Freising had a very strong say in this. For the first 3 years, the Center for Child Protection operated out of Munich because we were working together with the University Clinic for Youth, Psychiatry Clinic for Youth from University of Ulm in southern Germany. And so for logistical reasons, the Center for Child Protection was located in a building of the Archdiocese, which has helped us since then to, also with financial means, to do what is our mission, to promote awareness and safeguarding measures. And the very first beginning was this symposium, which took place under the auspices of the Gregorian University, but we had a high level representation by the prefects of different dicasteries, like the dicastery for doctrine, for education, for clergy, for bishops, for evangelization, and so forth. So even if it was not a Vatican conference or sponsored by the Holy See, we had the approval, at least implicitly, also by Pope Benedict, and he sent greetings through the then Secretary of State, Cardinal Bertone. I mention this because it was very helpful, as many said, this symposium was very helpful to draft the guidelines in many bishops' conferences, as they said. Now, the third pope I'm talking about is Pope Francis. He wrote a letter to all clergy on the day of the Curate of Ars on 4th of August 2019, in which he continues the language and the impetus of St. John Paul II and of Benedict. His words, if in the past omission may itself have been a kind of response, today we desire conversion, transparency, sincerity, and solidarity with victims to become our concrete way of moving forward. This, in turn, will help make us all the more attentive to every form of human suffering. So you see that the line continues. John Paul II speaks about purification. Benedict speaks about renewal. Francis speaks about solidarity, conversion. He adds also transparency and sincerity. And I will come back to that a little later. He also broadens the perspective, not only looking at child sexual abuse, but he reminds us that sexual abuse and abuse of power is an ingredient of every human suffering, every form of human suffering. So we see also an evolvement. We see some change of awareness also within church language, and many of us who have been working in this for many years have also had that conversion experience and that growth in our considering that it is not only sexual abuse of minors that we have to talk about, but also other types of abuse and other types of populations, not only minors of age, that we need to talk about. So what Pope Francis did in the first place was, after a year into his pontificate, he created the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. I was involved in the creation of that commission, and I was a member for over 9 years. And in the very first meeting we had in May 2014, we asked the Holy Father to meet with survivors and victims. Now, Pope Benedict had met with survivors on his travels, but to the best of my knowledge, on 7th of July 2014, Pope Francis received for the first time survivors inside the Vatican and listened to them. And I was privileged to accompany 2 German survivors, victims of abuse, clergy, sexual abuse as minors, in the meeting with him. So I was there as a translator, and the two were a lady who is public about this, and she lives actually in Munich. And the other person was and is a male, a family father who had been abused in another diocese. Um, so this was a very strong sign by Pope Francis that he really listens to victims and survivors, and I can say that with my own eyes and with my own ears, I've seen and heard, and I was impressed very much by Pope Francis's capacity to really take on what the two had to say to him. And they were very diverse in what they said and how they said it. But he was very empathetic and he was truly listening. And he set an example for the whole church in this. Now, in 2017, we draw the attention to something that I consider today as, globally speaking, as the biggest threat to the safety of children, that is connected to the digital world. So we in 2017 we hosted, together with other partners at the Gregorian University, the World Congress on Child Dignity in the Digital World, and were received at the end on 6th of October 2017 by Pope Francis when he gave a speech. And I urge you to look up that speech, because even if at that time not many spoke about artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence, the words that he with which he expressed his concerns and his requests also on companies to take their responsibility, and on politicians to really do what was needed and is even more needed today to keep young people, but not only young people, safe in the digital world, are still very, very valid. So even if this was not an initiative of the Pope or the Holy See, as we see in those remarks by Pope Francis, the Holy See and the Pope himself took it very seriously and gave very clear and very valid instructions what we need to consider today. Of course, one of the most important initiatives of Pope Francis was the Child Protection Summit that he called for in February 2019. He asked me to chair the organizing committee for that Child Protection Summit, which was basically a replica of the 2012 symposium that we held at the Gregorian. This time, however, in 2019, the Pope himself invited, and he invited not representatives of bishops' conferences, but the presidents of all bishops' conferences. And all of them, of course, showed up, together with a representation of the major superiors general, male and female, the heads of the Oriental churches in the Catholic Church, the prefects of the dicasteries. So that was, if you wish, a little church leadership summit. And the Pope, wanted to have it in February 2019, addressing not let me say, the obvious. The obvious is listen to victims, follow through with procedure, come up with the measures to deal with perpetrators. But he gave the church the task to reflect on what we call today the systemic issues. The systemic issues connected to abuse of any type, and the lack of implementation of what is needed and what church leaders are obliged to implement, and apply. Including also the negligence of office and cover up. In 2019, we addressed on the 3 days of the summit the responsibility of the ordinary. So, in church language, this is the bishop or the provincial or the major superior. The issue of accountability of those in positions of authority within the church, and the questions around transparency internally and externally. Internally, transparency regarding the processes and the procedures inside the church, and external transparency, collaboration with state authorities and with media. These were the topics of the 3 days of conferences of the Child Protection Summit inside the Vatican. So the results were that the Holy See guidelines and law changed again, were adapted. But most importantly, that there was a universal law with the beautiful name of Vos Estis Lux Mundi, which was published only a few weeks after the conclusion of the summit in 2019, which for the first time addresses the issue of accountability of church leaders, of ordinaries, of bishops and provincials and superior generals, not only in regard to the Holy See offices overseeing bishops and church and other church leaders, but also with the so-called metropolitan model, gives some co-responsibility to the bishops, especially when you talk about archbishops and bishops, to looking not only into abuse allegations, but also in the exercise of church norms by those who are supposed to apply and follow through with church law, which means the ordinaries. So we have a first step of accountability within the church that is really worthwhile considering. Of course, Vos Estis had also other important changes. From then on, within the church, we don't talk only about sexual abuse, we talk also about other types of abuse, including spiritual abuse. And with Vos Estis, we don't talk only about victims minors of age, but also so-called vulnerable adult persons. Plus, we don't talk only about clergy abuse, we also talk about non-clergy abuse, so lay people who abuse within church and church leadership positions. So these were important changes in law, but also in the perception and the attitude that the church shows and hopefully will be showing in the future regarding our issue. At the end of 2019, there were other two changes through the Pope himself. He issued so-called rescripta, in which, most importantly, he raised the age of child sexual exploitation, image, consumption, and dissemination from 14 to 18 years of age. And he took away the privilege of the so-called pontifical secret, which many bishops, unfortunately, had used over the decades, not to comply with state attorneys and other law enforcement over processes and allegations against clergy abuse. So the pontifical secret does not apply anymore when allegations of abuse are brought forward against clergy and non-clergy within the church, and ordinaries cannot hide behind the pontifical secret when they say they are not allowed or they can't produce documentation. A year later, the Dicastery for Doctrine published a vademecum, to a long and very elaborate document with which they want to help church authorities to know what they are supposed to do when it comes to the application of church law. And finally, the book six, the so-called book six of the Code of Canon Law of the Latin Church, incorporates in the revised version all the changes that have happened over the years by, for example, Vos Estis or by the Rescripta and so forth. So in the revised version of the penal canon law section in the Code of Canon Law, we have now the incorporation of those changes that were made over the previous 20 years. And I would like to continue with a few questions for canon law, especially also as I think there are a few, at least a few canon law experts among you. I have brought that to the attention of other audiences among canon lawyers and others. But I just want to flesh out a few of the questions that are still around for canon law and its implementation, especially how do we learn about how accountability, according to Vos Estis Lux Mundi, Wellm, is really applied and asked for. Because I contend that we have the norms, we have the rules that would suffice to really tackle not only abuse but also negligence in office and cover up in the church. But the question is how it is applied and how we know about the application. Other issues that have come about and are still in discussion is the definition of what is a vulnerable person according to canon law. There is no universally accepted definition of vulnerability and vulnerable person in civil society. We have no common understanding in civil societies or in universal bodies like the UN or any declaration like that, because there are different jurisdictions, there are different sensitivities, and we, unfortunately, I believe the same is true for the definition that we have as for the vulnerable person according to Wellm. In church law, I believe it is not clear enough who is considered a vulnerable person. I talk about minors of age and adults, which creates, let me say, ambivalence about who is really under the protection of that concept, and what do we do if a vulnerable person is really seen as that, and any type of abuse, sexual, physical, emotional, spiritual, needs to be prosecuted. The same is true for the concept of spiritual abuse. Much has been said over the last 2 or 3 years, also in the German-speaking countries, about spiritual abuse. However, how you measure spiritual abuse, how you punish spiritual abuse is not yet clear. So much so that the Dicastery for Doctrine has established in January 2025, a few weeks back, a working group on the definition of spiritual abuse within the church. So this is all happening during the pontificate of Pope Francis. What has not happened yet is the publication of case law when it comes to the processes and the procedures in regard to allegations of abuse against clergy, for example, at the DDF. We don't have case law, which is very unfortunate because many bishops and provincials receive the verdict of, let me say, of a trial at the DDF, but they don't see the motivation of why DDF came to that conclusion. And sometimes, as many bishops have told me, it is not clear why in one case the verdict is in one way and in another case it's much more lenient or much more severe, and you don't know the motivation for that. So this is still some of the major concerns that many peoples have, like the definition of rights and duties of plaintiffs, defendants, superiors in canonical trials. We don't have such definitions. Like we don't have a definition of offenses and corresponding penalties. Still, canon law speaks about, for example, clergy sexual abuse against minors only in terms of a breach of the sixth commandment. Yes, now we have it inserted in the under the article of or the chapter better of the let me say violation of human dignity. Yes, this is a step forward. It's not just let me say sexual misbehavior. It is a violation of human dignity. But still, we don't have a definition of the offenses, what is considered rape, what is considered assault, what is considered harassment, and so forth, and the corresponding penalties. It is still only up to the judge to determine that. And there is, as I said, there is not a clarity about how to apply elements and criteria for coming up with verdicts. Finally, training in skills and techniques and delegation of specialized persons in the canonical trials is still one of the major concerns. So these are questions for canon law. I have another set of questions for theology, but we don't have time now to go deeper into that. These are things that have come up, and I'm very happy that under the pontificate of Pope Francis, we were able to develop such ideas, and I mean, some of this has evolved, some is still really very much in the making. And now, with the election of Pope Leo XIV, we will see what he will say, and I'm pretty sure that over the next weeks or months he will address abuse and safeguarding in one of his speeches or in whatever measure he will take. Of course, I can't say anything about him, except that I first came to know him in 2012 when he was one of the major superiors of men who were participating in the symposium toward healing and renewal. And he was vice president of the Bishops' Conference in Peru when in 2020 in 2020 I was invited by the very same bishops' conference to address all the bishops in Peru in a very difficult time for the bishops with the turmoil around the Sodalizio, this lay movement that was dissolved a few months back in 2025 by Pope Francis. And Bishop Prevost at that time was vice president of the conference. So I'm quite confident that he will continue the line of St. Paul II, Benedict, and Francis. He has listened to victims of abuse, as some victims from Peru have already stated publicly over the last weeks, if you follow news about that. I'm pretty confident that as a canon lawyer by trade, he is very keen to evolve further, not only the wording and the clarity of concepts in canon law, but also the implementation. And I'm hopeful that he will continue also to push for more accountability within the church, following the measures that Vos Estis has set out. Thank you for your attention. I don't know whether we have now some time for further interaction, but I thank you for listening to this, and I thank you for all you can do so that our responsibility as a church in and faithful in the safeguarding of all of human beings is really lived out as part and parcel of our mission.